Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours for April 2020. Welcome. Standard safe harbor statement. Things are very subject to change, and particularly in the open source world. So on this call, we have myself in the middle, Christopher Jones, product manager for a whole bunch of things in the data access group, primarily looking after the scripting languages, so doing all the little bits and pieces, tidying up in the back end, documentation, dealing with customer questions, presentations like this. On the left of that page, we have Anthony Tuaninga, who's doing most of the hardcore development work for all of our drivers here at Oracle, leading a team there. And Blaine Carter, who's our evangelist, who does all of the outreach stuff that we need doing, and is certainly looking at things like the hands-on labs that we want to run for other languages at various conferences, online sessions, things like that. Does a lot of things with hardware as well, so Internet of Things. So generally, this is the team you have. So I'm going to jump straight into it. I have one slide, and then I'll just run a presentation. So we were going to talk about node-oracledb 5. It is, as you know, in progress. All of the current code is on GitHub. It's relatively stable. We're just, in the final stages of trying to pin down a few bits and pieces there with it, and desperately, or not desperately, but would desperately love your input. If you can go and build and test it, that would be good. In fact, I'm going to show you how to build it if you want to build it yourself. A lot of features there. We're not going to cover all of those in this session. I thought I'd keep it pretty brief. Clocks have changed for us here, so it's early by my normal getting up time before my breakfast. And I have made it a habit in the past of never replying to emails before breakfast because I always regret that. So, but we'll be fine today, I'm sure. The big caveat there I just wanted to raise, we talked about it last session a couple of months back, is that we're removing support for custom promises. So I think most people are using native promises, which have been in Node.js for some time. But if a few people are still using Bluebird, then you probably just want to continue using the current version of node-oracledb that you're using. So with that, let's jump into sort of demonstration. Actually, let's look at changelog. So there are a bunch of things. We will talk about some of these in detail a little in other sessions. Nested cursors, the startup and shutdown stuff is coming in. There's a bunch of things which are coming in for newer versions of Oracle. So most of you probably don't have these versions. So it's not really worth us talking about those in a lot of detail. Some of them are relatively small. But the one I wanted to talk about today is way down the bottom, which is kind of just an interesting one somewhere, this Webpack example. So I'm in no means a Webpack expert, and I've relied heavily on our users out there on the GitHub issues list to educate me. And the bit I just wanted to show you, the facet I wanted to show you today, was just the Oracle DB connectivity bit in terms of how you plug Oracle DB into a Webpack. So Webpack, basically, in terms of what we're doing in terms of JavaScript, it kind of minifies all your JavaScript, builds you a single JavaScript file, and we'll get to that in a bit. One thing I did, and I should give a shout out, as you can probably see here, this is a fork from example from a relatively anonymous GitHub user who's a contributor here to node-oracledb community, Mr. MX, and he or she has created this Webpack example, and I've just modified it for purposes of today. So you can go and grab that example if you want. And that's about it. The rest is just there for placeholders. So if we look at, actually, let me do that. If we look at this clone, my fork of the example, I have all the steps there that you need to follow. I'm going to do one extra pre-step here, which is actually I'm going to build the node-oracledb driver, because to use Webpack effectively, you somehow need to get a patch version of node-oracledb, and the patch version is in this version 5.0, which, as I mentioned, is currently on GitHub. There's no pre-built binary for that. So I'm actually going to start with a slightly different example and show you how to build node-oracledb for use as a distribution within your own company, which just makes it a little bit easier for us to use with the Webpack example. So here I have, as you can see above, this is a standard clone of the node-oracledb repository. All of our standard directories up there. In the package.json, there are a couple of run targets, and I have all the prerequisites installed on this machine. So I have the compiler, I have the versions of Python which are needed. It's relatively easy on Mac OS as I'm using, and Linux. Windows, you need the correct version of Visual Studios, and I'm never a big fan of Windows for open source things because it's always such a lockdown environment. So we have a couple of targets there which are pre-configured, build binary, and this is what we use when we're going to build up a bundle which we host up on the NPM repository for you to install later for a production version. So you can see here that this is built a 5.0 dev version, the current version, tagged or not tagged, marked in the code. What this has done, if you just excuse a couple of Git Emacs things, so I split the window there. This has built the binary module. So .node is the extension which Node uses for its binary modules, and it's put this in the staging directory. And when we are building release packages, I run that same command, build binary, on a couple of platforms, Linux, Windows, and Mac. And I just copy all of the node, and then this is just a little text file just for us to track things down if we need to get more information. I copy all of those into this staging directory. And then I would run build package. And that has created a package. It's zipped up a bunch of things, basically created a tarball. And as you can see, it's copied all of our JavaScript files that are needed, and it's copied the binary. As I mentioned, if I'd had these extra binaries in the staging directory, we'd just copy those as well. And I would end up with a bundle, and here I've ended up with a bundle which will only work on Mac OS, on the Darwin architecture. So that is great. So here it is in the home directory, TGZ file, and I can just literally do, if I was copy that around to other machines, I could then do an npm install on that file if I wanted to do that. So this is kind of convenient because I can upload that to, say, a web server in my network, and then anybody else on my network can just install that one binary that I built. So if you need to make any tweaks, you want to get rid of architectures, if you don't want those extra 400K in the package, whatever you want to do, you want to test the development versions, this is just a convenient way to do it. I could, of course, have done the npm build command here to install it, and it would have just built the source code in this directory and created just one mess of the source code and the binaries. But generally, I like this just particularly for demonstrations, just to build up this little package. So that's the precursor to the Webpack. Didn't really need to do that, but I just like doing it, and it's nice. And then it's giving you some extra information you can use as well. So if we go to the Webpack directory, this is my clone, and this is the list at the top of the window. This is everything in this directory. Let me look first at package.json. So very small application, has a couple of extra plugins here for Webpack. So these are nice npm modules people have created. We need clean, just makes it a little nicer when you want to rerun the command, so it does a cleanup first. Copy Webpack is necessary because we need to copy that extra binary module around because it's a non-standard and not a JavaScript file or an image file that Webpack really knows about. So we need to do an extra copy command there. Obviously need Webpack itself and then the command line, because we're going to be using some command line tools. As you can see down here, so this is yet another npm run target. And going to do an install, so it's going to install all of my dependencies, and then actually going to run Webpack and do whatever's in this configuration file for Webpack. So at the end of this, I'm going to end up with a single kind of directory which contains my whole application. I can copy that directory around. So let's look at that config file. As I mentioned, we have this couple of extra plugins. So the first thing is that it has some example code, and I'll show you the example code in a minute. It's going to copy all of the output into a directory called dist, in the current working directory, and it's going to have a entry file name called index.js. So we're going to copy effectively example.js, every other bit and piece I'll show you, into an index.js in the dist directory. This is the key thing here, and Mr. MX has been just testing this, and demonstration I'm going to show you shows it as well, that Webpack overloads the loading that the require command in Node.js, and that breaks things when the OracleDB JavaScript files try to require the binary. So we need to copy them to a particular directory in the output. Obviously, we need to actually copy that binary. I just showed you earlier the text file and the .node file. So we're going to copy those things across. And then in OracleDB itself, so I'm jumping into the OracleDB code. So this is the node-oracledb driver. This is part of the implementation of node-oracledb. We have in this version 5 added some extra code here to A at the top, revert or work around the fact that Webpack overloads the require command and doesn't behave in terms of directory path searches the way that the normal require would. So basically we're saying if you've got this non-Webpack require, we're going to actually use it. So this is effectively reverting what Webpack's going to do in this, obviously in this JavaScript file. And then we actually can load, and these 2 lines, these macros convert into that .node file you saw with the Darwin architecture embedded, or if you're doing the build yourself, you may not have that. That npm run build binary creates that particular name used here, or if you're running the npm install directly, you might not have that extra attributes there in the file name. So basically these 2 things in the version 5 yet to be released version of node-oracledb mean that we can, as a Webpack user, actually load the binary, and therefore obviously our node-oracledb applications run well. So going back to the config, and I said I would show you the source example. So there's not a lot here in the source directory. At the bottom of the screen, we have the example, and some of you may know this. I've been reverting that, playing with that. Some of you may recognize this as one of the standard examples we have there in the GitHub node-oracledb example directory. So creating a table, inserting some rows, and selecting back. So it's not a long-running web app. It's just going to do a insert query and then terminate. It also includes a standard configuration file, which just reads environment variables for the credentials. So effectively, our application is just these two files together. So let me go and run that. I think that's all I wanted to do. npm run build. Oh, sorry, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to actually modify this package.json to show you the package.json. So by default, when you clone that repository, the example repository, it will install OracleDB from GitHub. So it'll install the source code. GitHub obviously has source code, and Node will know how to, or npm rather, will know how that it needs to be compiled, and will compile it, and therefore you do need to have the C compiler, etc. installed. A few minutes ago in this demonstration, I actually did the build. So let's go and actually just change this and use that build. And I'm going to live dangerously here and see if I can get all of this sorted out. Node OracleDB, and let me go. Actually, I will not live dangerously. I'll get that proper file name, tgz. Where did I put that? Down the bottom. Cut and paste that in. Since I've already built it, I don't need to build it again. And this is a cross check. Yes, that is the file. It's Emacs has automatically unzipped it for me and untarred it for me. So that's good. And so that dependency is going to be satisfied. Now, some of you may have spotted in this Webpack example directory that I already have node modules here. So I've actually run the install before because it does download a bunch of stuff, as you're all familiar with Node. Now, I've deliberately manually actually just deleted the OracleDB subdirectory here. So if I do my npm run build, which is the target in the build script, and you can see on the bottom of the screen, then it's going to install node OracleDB. Nicely installed, found the binary. Let me just scroll back up. In fact, I'll go back to the single window. So installed my binary, obviously the dev version, the one we had built before, and it's done some packaging up of all of the modules that we need here. Particularly if you look at the very bottom, the index and the example. Sorry, it's created the index from the example. So it's actually used this is the main entry point into node-oracledb. So it's copied that and the example. I've slight confusion with multiple index.js files. What it did there is it created a dist directory, which we saw in the Webpack config file. And this has, I'll go into the node modules directory. It has the binaries we created. And if I pop back up, oops, if I pop back up, it has a single JavaScript file, which I will load. And as you can see, it's kind of minified. There's a bunch of stuff in here. If your eye sort of skims over it, you can see that there's a bunch of message files. So this sort of top half is all of the implementation, all of the JavaScript for node-oracledb driver itself, all of the things in the node-oracledb/lib directory. And if you look at the bottom somewhere, we can see here is the implementation in the example.js file. So we've basically packaged everything up. I'm not showing you any other static assets, but we now have a single dist directory, which is our application. What it doesn't have, and this was one thing I was going to show you, which is why I had this up, was what we've done here is we've packaged your programs, that was example.js, and the node-oracledb driver into one directory. We do not have Node.js itself, and we do not have Oracle client libraries. So these two things need to be installed separately on the machine. But it's still a single module which you can copy around and makes it a lot easier to share. I said it doesn't package Instant Client. If you were on Windows, you could put Instant Client into this directory, into the release directory, and that version would be used only on Windows. And since I'm not a Windows user, I will not be able to show you that currently. Let's go back to this dist. I can just copy it somewhere else. So let's go into the temp directory, recursive copies, yes. Go into the temp directory. And if you look at the README, it said set your environment variables for the credentials. I already have those set. And I can just run my dist index. And that should, if I set my environment variables, so the alias to set my environment variables, it runs the application, which, as you saw, inserted and then discrete results. And that's it. That is the overview of Webpack with an example there that you can copy and use as you like. Again, I'm not an expert on Webpack, so certainly yell out on forums for help as you need it. But the node-oracledb bit there is the fact that you need to do this extra copy plugin to copy the binary modules, and then you need to be using a version 5 of node-oracledb. And I know you probably want to know when is version 5 coming out, and that is yet to be decided as we sort of add features and just wait for some things to stabilize. The more work you do on it to stabilize it, then soon it will come out. But I actually don't have an ETA at the moment. We'll probably have a meeting in the next couple of days as a dev team and try and work out a schedule for that. I know some other people want some other features to jump in as well. So we'll look at that, yell out for your demands, and so we know your priorities and timings as well, so we can factor those in. And with that, I will go back to slides and just throw up some resources there. On the video, I will put up a proper link in when the recording goes up. We'll see if we can get the link to the Webpack example put up properly. And I see on the Zoom chat from Danilo Silva, who is a long-term contributor, has contributed directly into the node-oracledb and is active on our forums. It says Webpack is very cool and use it to bundle resources that become a browser. So that's common use of Webpack is actually a browser-side bundling. But yes, it definitely can be used with Oracle, as our users have found, Mr. MX in particular, and a couple of other users who've raised questions and issues on the GitHub issues list. So glad to be able to educate you there on that. And thanks, Danilo, for staying up, and hopefully your travel plans will come to fruition at some stage. So, yep, again, shout out to Mr. MX, this anonymous GitHub user who's contributed to Webpack usage. And to people like Danilo, who direct contributors, please do get involved and enjoy and share node-oracledb. So let's wrap up. Thank you very much for joining the Node.js and Oracle Database Office Hours. We will see you in a couple of months or on the forums beforehand. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.